Hi, everyone. Well, I must say you have made my task easier with this video. I don't have to introduce the duelists. I'll just say a couple of words about what's going to happen. We have about half an hour for each pair of contestants, and we have a topic for each pair, a discussion topic. And although in our discussions or conversations before the very beginning of today's session, it is not really guaranteed that our wonderful speakers will stick to these subjects, but that's even better because our speakers can take just any subject and handle it. And I'm not even sure that the strict format of those duels will be adhered to. We have just one limitation, that's half an hour for each pair, and we have two support teams, cheer teams. So when the contestants come out on stage, choose the cheer team you like best, and they will ask you questions and will support you. At the end of each duel, there will be a vote held using your standard voting system. It will start functioning in about 15 to 20 minutes. Or if it doesn't, just remember whose speaker sounded more convincing and give your vote later. And now I invite the first pair. It's Olaf Hauer and Daniel Wolf. Since you have seen the introductions in the video, I'll just say one thing which is important to know what the starting positions are of our contestants. Olaf is a psychologist and Daniel is a cryptocurrency expert. So when you discuss artificial and human intelligence, I take it that Daniel is more likely to take up the machine-oriented aspects and all of the human aspects, and you will discuss the subject in English, although you can speak Russian as well. So choose the language you prefer. Now the format. Who would like to be the first? Olaf. Okay, this is the format. We have 3 minutes for the starting statement. For each speaker's starting statement, we have a clock here, and I will show you in every way when the time is up. And after the 2 initial statements, you give each other questions, and we will then handle it the way I am instructed. And my task is to prevent you from manhandling. I'm sure it won't happen. And the more interesting the discussion, the better for everyone. Olaf, over to you. In the first place, I'd like to say that yesterday,
though we've met first time, we liked each other and had found a lot of points in common. Furthermore, going on with the issue that I addressed yesterday, collaboration and authenticity instead of confrontation and double standards or competition double standards, we decided to go for a rather collaborative frame today. Anyway, we will address a number of questions that we think are important. That's why I asked both of the teams rather support both of us instead of just one of us, because after a huge argue, most likely people are not too willing to come together again and to collaborate. Okay, having said this, I pass it on to you.
Всем привет. Good morning. I wanted to say I was a student at the Leningrad State University in 1985 in the summer. And you may not know, but the 12th World Forum of Youth and Students took place that summer. And as I was on a program with 125 American students, they kicked us out of the country. It's not a joke. And I just want us to note that it's lovely that we now live in a world where not only do they want us to participate, but they have invited me to speak here. So for me, it's a very special place to be. We're going to talk a little bit about artificial intelligence. And in the next 90 seconds, I'll give you some definitions about what it is. As you probably know, artificial intelligence is when computer systems or machines are used to perform tasks that human beings would otherwise perform. If you've ever done a Google search or used a map or GPS to get anywhere, you're using artificial intelligence, and there are many, many other examples. Artificial intelligence is also adaptable. It means that the computer over time learns new things and can start to make decisions without the interference of human beings. Unfortunately, as you may have heard, there's a lot of fear around artificial intellect. Elon Musk very recently said that humanity risks summoning the demon with artificial intelligence. And, you know, as you all probably know, there is The Terminator, right? The first big movie that showed us, you probably don't know what that movie is, but you should watch it, it's a very good movie, but where a robot comes from the future and tries to exterminate humanity. Finally, one little kind of creepy story about AI, which will help Olaf to kick things off. You may have heard the company Target in the United States, which is like Walmart, a retailer. They had an artificial intelligence program that was trying to figure out when women were pregnant, because when they have their first child, they actually make a whole bunch of decisions what they're going to buy on things they had never bought before. And big companies love that. They can convince them to be members. And so when their artificial intelligence was just looking at what they bought in Target, started to send women emails with coupons for, you know, baby bottles and Pampers. And it turned out their artificial intelligence was so good that it often would send these before the woman knew she was pregnant. And a lot of women were very creeped out by the fact that Target was able to know that they were pregnant when they hadn't told people about it. So, you know, just one of the scary things about
I will also then speak English so that you don't need to switch your interpreter's channel. We already started not in a way as we expected. So Olaf started and immediately passed to Dan. Yes, so now I pass it back to Olaf. Yeah. Now Olaf, again, it's your turn to your statement.
Yeah. So Daniel, what would you say about the following stuff? So we human beings, we have a body. We can feel our body. We have thoughts, obviously. We can track the development of our thoughts. We have feelings. We can impact on our feelings. We have a sense of, how to say, justice or not. We all have this. We have consciousness, obviously, more or less. And now we human beings are developing artificial intelligence, which might not have neither a body nor a consciousness, no feelings. So why is it that that human beings go for artificial things that may take over everything?
It's a good question. You know, one of the things that I think when I think about artificial intelligence is it gives us an opportunity to automate many tasks that people find dull or dangerous or dirty. And so one of the reasons why we do this is to create helpers for ourselves, so we can actually find more time to realize our potential as creative beings. And as we spoke last night, you know, one of the questions we were wondering was, you know, could a computer ever meditate?
Yeah.
You know, it's very, very interesting, and nobody knows the answer. There's a company in California that was set up by an MIT professor. And this professor and an entrepreneur have created a program that listens to phone conversations between customer service representatives and people calling to complain. And the machine helps people be more empathetic. The machine says, you're speaking much louder than you were. You haven't said anything in a long time. Say something. The person you're speaking to seems upset. Provide an empathetic response. So, there's a possibility that all of this artificial intellect will help us become more human. There's in this article that I read about this company Cogito, it's called. It was in Inc. magazine. The professor said, it's an interesting thing. If you ask a person, are you empathetic? On a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the most empathetic, everyone says they're a 4 or 5, even though most of us are a 2 or a 3.
Yeah. Okay, so good idea to think about artificial intelligence could help people to become more human-like. Okay, so next question is about, I would say, the values of the creators of artificial intelligence. I mean, one might think that the creator of artificial intelligence must be on a very high level of moral integrity. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, I remind you of one of the Alien movies, one of the last ones, where a human told the cyborg, we created you just because we can. Just because we can. That's it. And we don't care about the consequences of that. And the consequences for him were deadly. Mm-hmm. So what would you say about this, about the values of the creators of artificial intelligence?
Well, I mean, this is a very good question, of course, and especially because most of the people developing AI are not psychologists. Mm-hmm. They're not ethicists. Mm. One of the things that I think will happen over time is we'll see, an explosion in people who are ethicists, right? I mean, when the classic example is the automatic car, which is going down a road, and in front of the car are 5 people tied to the road, and they could make a right-hand turn, but there's somebody crossing the street there. And, at that time, the computer just makes a decision, right? There's a program that says, it might say minimize life. So if there's 5 people in front and 1 on the right, it'll turn right. Doesn't matter if the person on the right is carrying a baby, for example. So I think this is one of the questions. But for me, I think we need to address the ethical questions that arise and not, throw the baby out with the bathwater, if you will. We have to make sure that we develop artificial intelligence, and in part because, the world is still full of many bad actors. And if the good actors are not developing AI, the bad actors will. I mean, the most horrible things that will happen is, human beings can use artificial intelligence to go to Mars, to feed people. Farming is becoming increasingly computerized, to make faster decisions, to work in harsh environments where we can't work. And all of these things are wonderful things, but my guess is that human beings will also wage war with artificial intelligence, which is a concern. Mm. So, one of the questions I would ask you is, if we choose that it's too dangerous for humans to have this artificial intelligence out there, or we limit ourselves to it, what would we lose?
It's a good question. What would we lose if we chose not going with artificial intelligence? We would obviously. It's a good question. What would we lose? We would lose the opportunity to think of the benefits of artificial intelligence. We would obviously lose the opportunity to really think of what do we want to do with it. And actually, it's the same question. Where do we want to go? Where do we want to go? And this is the question, obviously, also all of the participants here have to ask themselves. So to me, still, the process of getting more conscious and getting more responsible for our actions and living in a one world instead of separating is still the leading motive for me. And I think that right now, politicians have to go through this way as well. But what will we lose without artificial intelligence? Difficult to say. So obviously a lot of helpers, obviously a lot of analysis, obviously a lot of work that could have been done by us only after a huge period of time. So we would lose efficiency, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the scary things to me about artificial intelligence is all of the jobs that are going to disappear, right? I mean, everyone who has a job driving a car or a truck in this world is likely going to be replaced by a computer in the next 10 years. Because computers don't sleep, they don't drink, they don't get upset, they never look at their smartphone, they don't get texts. And, this is a huge disruption in the world. And so one of the things we also have to figure out as we go into artificial intelligence is, yes, it's great if people don't have to do unpleasant, dangerous work. But what if they don't have to work at all? And what if the artificial intelligence then exacerbates this great disconnect between the very wealthiest among us and the poorest among us, as the internet has, right? Everybody thought the internet would create a leveling, but economically the internet has been very good for 5 companies.
Yes. So there's one more question I'd like to ask you is, forgot the question.
I mean, let's go back to your question. I really like the idea of this question of whether a machine can ever be conscious, right?
Yeah.
And as you love collaboration, the question for me always arises is, everybody, maybe because of the Terminator, thinks, oh, the robots are going to kill us. But what if we're friends with the robots? What if we have shared goals? I mean, maybe the robots can make us even better than we are without them.
Well, that's an interesting topic. So then we come back to a very simple term, which is trust. 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 Do we trust each other? Do we trust artificial intelligence? Does artificially intelligent beings trust each other? Or don't they need it to trust? So we need to trust.
Yeah. Well, the trust, there was a very interesting, we spoke about this last night, interesting when Google and Facebook created some artificial intelligence that was supposed to help them with some of their algorithms. And both of the companies separately decided to have 2 artificial intelligences that would try to attack the problem and that would talk to each other. Both Google and Facebook recently unplugged the computers because the AI was talking to itself with each other in a language the programmers did not understand. And so it's very hard to trust them when the programmer's like, we don't know what they're talking about. They're using a different language.
Yeah.
And so it's, kind of an interesting question about collaboration.
Dear speakers, if please answer, because and then I will.
I still have a question. Look, Daniel, if we would achieve the following, that mankind in general is not driven by fear, but by joy, happiness, sense of discovery, and trust. Then we could obviously relate to artificial intelligence with those same values, which obviously increases the likelihood that artificial intelligence would respond in the same way. What do you think?
I like that idea.
Dear speakers, you ruined all the procedure right from the beginning, so we're not following the rules that were given to us. So I will take over, and we'll answer you. We'll ask you one question that I would like you to answer, and then we have 2 teams that are also willing to give you some questions. Just one simple question: being quite on the different positions, but being a wise man, can you please give a very simple and short forecast? How do you see the real world will look like in that sense, in, 50, 100 years? Yeah, there are several radical options. One option, it will be taken over by the artificial intelligence. Yeah, one option. Another option, there is no artificial intelligence because we are afraid and we plug them out completely. Plug them off. Third option, there is artificial intelligence which really supports us, which helps us as smartphones are doing now. How do you expect the real world will look like, Olaf?
Yeah, I want the real world look like this. People completely conscious, people completely exploiting their potentials. I would like to people be able to communicate on distance, maybe even travel with their spirit, I don't know, and use for that artificial intelligence. I even can imagine the following, that I would, let's say, an artificial intelligence being that I trust, enter my body, my brain, my soul, and collaborate with me on those different travels, yeah? Something like this.
Okay.
So
Dan?
coexistence, it's coexistence. Yeah.
I have no doubt that we will, 100 years from now, live in a world where massive amounts of human tasks are done by machines. And the reason is, it's already happening in large part. You know, so much of what we have in a smartphone was impossible to imagine when I was born 52 years ago. So there's no question it'll be a completely different world. And I think the fear that we have of people not having work and maybe not feeling like they're productive because of this, I think that will have to be addressed, A, because it's important for humans to feel meaning and everyone understands that, but B, because all of the people who are building all of these amazing machines will want there to be people who can buy them. So I think we'll figure out the way to, whether it's providing a universal income to make people, but I'm sure we'll be in a world where, you know, farming is done by computer. There'll be operations being done all over the world, even where there aren't doctors, because if you have appendicitis, a robot can fix it. So I think it'll be amazing.
Okay, so you are not afraid that artificial intelligence will take over. Good. One small question to organizers. Can I ask you to give us the time which we still have for that pair of participants, because the discussion can last forever. Yeah, there are so many questions. I have 4 questions that I don't have time to ask. So I would ask our supporters team to raise if there are any. Yes, please. Questions.
Thank you very much, dear presenters. My name is Ilya Ionchkin, PJC Rossetti. So I have a question to you. So you raised a very interesting question about the artificial intelligence. So in 10 years, as you said, artificial intellect will replace some jobs. So my question is, what will happen if we need, you know, not logical response to something, not logical resolution, but you know, some people's relation. So I mean, if there is some negotiation, if there are some not logical thing, what could happen with artificial intelligence in that way? Thank you very much.
Well, I think it's a good question. I mean, you know, one of the things that's going to happen is all of us are going to have to become, you know, facile at interacting with machines. And people who are successful managers of companies will be those people who can not only get the most out of their humans, but who can also get the most out of their machines. So I think a lot of this is gonna change. And I also, as I mentioned earlier, I think there'll be an explosion of ethicists sitting with the programmers saying, wait, have you considered these particular issues, or how will people feel about it? But you know, I think you're right that there's a human element that will have to be put in there, but machines might one day be as good at that as we are.
So,
Olaf?
First of all, probably you can choose either to make use of an artificial intelligence or a human being. You might even ask the one who is in need, so do you want to talk to an artificial intelligence or to a human being? That's number one. Number two, friends of mine are developing some software which gives constant biological feedback to a person. So something like, now your heart rate is lower, or you're sweating too much, or you are somewhat tired. So even people might getting feedback from artificial intelligence might say, man, I'm too tired to talk with you now, or I'm not sure if I can really be of help. I pass you over to another human being, for instance. So again, I would rather go in a collaborative way to use artificial intelligence. And maybe sometimes human beings who are in need of some support would say, you know, right now I don't need any emotional response, I need a logical response. In this case, a person might say, I want to deal with artificial intelligence without all that feeling stuff, because I myself, I'm too emotionalized and I need to calm down. Yeah?
Yeah, thank you. Well, Yeah, I'm afraid that this was the last question. Actually, sorry, the first and the last question that we have time to. It is good that we had this discussion not in 100 years' time, because I'm afraid that if we are conquered by artificial intelligence, two Wikipedias cannot argue, right? So it's good that we have different opinions. So I would like to thank our speakers for the first part. Yes, thank you for that. Thank you all. Yeah. Дальше мы продолжаем на
Now we continue in Russian. And once again, I would like to ask the organizers, we tested the procedure, so could I get the timing so that I understand when our 30 minutes are over? Now we have two participants, Margarita Rusetskaya and Tatiana Batisheva. We're talking about digitalization of childhood. And our wonderful ladies participants, they've already been introduced. And I would like to mention one issue which is highly important. Margarita Rusetskaya has a PhD in pedagogical sciences, and Tatiana Batisheva has PhD in medicine. And here we have this discussion. That's going to give the chance for the ladies to look at everything from their own angle, their wonderful professional point of view and experience. It seems to me that it's an interesting idea to try and understand. Although we just have half an hour, but we must understand this digitalization which is coming to our world today. Is it good or bad? Okay, choose your side. Unfortunately, last time we didn't have time for the questions from the public. Now you have the floor. Thank you. Good morning to everyone in Sochi. We live in the times when we have such density of changes, such a number of innovations that humanity never encountered. And the most serious changes are in the fact that innovations themselves, they change psychophysiological sphere of people. The most serious changes touched upon the sphere of human communications, our communications. Several 100,000 years ago, people got literacy, and they lived through the times similar to those that we have when we have display communications. And our brain is evolving, our psyche is evolving, our mind is evolving, and we have to acquire new functions to be efficient and survive in this world. Darwin could be really happy today because of all this empirical material which is available. We're not going to live in the era that was prior to the internet. We don't have two types of communications, we have three. We have oral, we have speech, written speech, and digital speech. And digital speech, digital communication is something we have to teach our children in. And this is a new challenge. We shouldn't talk about gadgets and harm of gadgets. It's like discussing the harm of newspaper, that when you read the newspaper, you inhale lead ink. But there are certain challenges, communications, but this is the new way of communications, efficient way of communications with the rules of their own. And there are new tasks for doctors, for the teachers, psychologists. And when we're talking about digital society, digital economy, digital society is impossible without digital school, digital childhood, digital communications. Tatiana, Good morning, dear friends. We have this wonderful audience, young people. It's so great that we discuss these important things. I am not a theoretician, I'm a practitioner. Every day I encounter also these problems of gadgetization. Now we have the delay in the development, and by the age of 2 years, children must say not less than 200 words. Now for the mother, it's easier to give a gadget to a toddler and say, please watch a cartoon. It's highly important. The child doesn't understand what is sadness, what is joy, what is to be done further. And it leads to aggression and autoaggression. And it's quite a frequent problem. Children play less because when you play, it's creativity. The child is limited by gadgets. And the boundaries are not clear. Virtual reality is prevailing. There is less creative activity. What are we going to leave to those who come after us? Our browsing history. And when we are involved with gadgets, and when children are in contact with gadget, children don't think. They stop thinking. Can you imagine this terrible tragedy? It's madhouse, it's schizophrenia. The gadgets are used to avoid discomfort. Z generation, every day you spend 5 hours on the net. Every 30 minutes you just check what's new on your social media. And I am here, I am happy that Wi-Fi is on. Okay, I am connected. We don't live without this, and it's highly important. The scientists proved that internet-dependent people have the same changes as those people who have alcohol and drug addiction. This is the most troubling fact that we have to discuss, lack of emotional resilience. Remember last winter, when the people learned about the blue whale, number of suicides of children, and not everyone is going to commit suicide if you get a message on the net. So people were ready for this situation. And I must tell you that my colleagues, psychiatrists, they say for about 20 years that there is a certain gadget addiction also leads to certain disturbances. And this is not just the situation in our country. And people know about I would like to stop you. I'm sorry. I have to use this. I have a duty as a moderator. I believe that, the position is clear. Yes, I hope that the position is clear. But how can we get to the future? And the first that I would like to ask Tatiana, don't you think that you transfer this problem to the gadget area from the problem of parents' responsibility? How ready is the generation of parents, adults, make children ready for normal internet communications in accordance with the requirements of hygiene, internet safety, and so on? Thank you so much. This is a highly important question. Well, I'm not talking about gadgets as such. I am not against civilization. We believe that we know everything and we can do anything. And parents know how to teach children to play with the gadgets. It's not so. We have to create the culture of information, communications, and this is the main task. It's so great that we have so many people that listen to us, and I believe that they're going to create this important culture. They're going to convey to their children. Yes, Margarita is talking about it. Let's create the culture. Tatiana, you are a doctor, and you describe and you cure. You're looking for the medicine. But every century, the humanity had the diseases of its own. In the 21st century, and one of the diseases of the 21st century is schizophrenia. And that's why the mental disorders, of course, could be the side effects that we have to deal with, but we cannot accuse display communications of everything. Doctors often helped the humanity. So as a doctor, how do you see specific ways of dealing with this problem? So are you ready to come to the rescue with this disease of the century? It's highly important, and nobody apart from the doctors can look at the situation from the inside. We can see only tip of the iceberg, but what is down there, the threats for human body, well, it can be seen by doctors only. And the idea of our round table is such that we could unite our effort, and the medical community could tell us about the dangers inside and create new environment with the participation of doctors. What can be better? We have to be healthy. While we are alive, we keep on living and would like to have nice quality of life. Let us have gadgets, let us have artificial intelligence, but it must be with us and it shouldn't destroy us from the inside.
When we become soulless creatures and lose our souls, the dearest thing we have. And it's very important that today a physician and a teacher, while discussing and debating things, going toward the same end. But Margarita asked you, how do you physicians? Well, I said we should cooperate in preparing our standpoint from within and tell people about the threats we need to thwart today, not tomorrow. Prophylaxis is the main thing, and don't do harm. Now, to carry on with the don't do harm subject, but don't you think, Tatiana, that when we talk about a new reality, both physicians and diagnostic experts should assess people in a new way rather than use old tools of analysis, psychological analysis. And we apply the tools that were developed 50 to 60 years ago when there was no internet. It's probably the fact that the tools are not valid, and according to those tests, we get very poor ratings for our children, but maybe we're using a ruler to measure the power of the current in the socket, but shouldn't we perhaps open our eyes to the fact that our children are really a new generation? This opinion has a place, but this is really not true. Medicine has been developing very fast, and there are new techniques, new opinions, but please understand that there are certain standards for development. If a child is expected to start speaking by 2 years, the age of 2 years, it's not really serious to discuss gender or age-specific peculiarities. Of course, there are super modern cutting-edge diagnosis techniques, and we can identify risk groups for mental disorders. Not everybody can really stay in the internet 24/7. There are 10% of early born, prematurely born children with underdeveloped processes in their brains, and the growth of disability. The number of disabled people is growing, not only in this country, but worldwide, and this means there are... okay, Tatiana, shall we cut off the internet? No, we should not do that, but let's create an information ecology, and let's teach people to live competently with the internet, using all of its advantages. Now let's Tatiana ask her questions to Margarita. Dear Margarita, could you tell me what do we do with the scaring growth of children's and teenagers' aggression when the kids lose the distinction, the ability to distinguish between the real and virtual worlds? This is not happening for the first time, not even in this country. We remember that when society was economically transformed, the children, the teenagers, and the older people suffered from those transformations. And teenage alcoholism and tobacco smoking and drug addiction, it all was characteristic of the transitional period, but we coped with that, and we are working on preventing tobacco smoking. Raise your hands if you smoke. Smokers. Okay, that's beautiful. You can see there are very few hands raised, and a lot has been done, both by physicians and by those who are responsible for advertising and the selling of those products. And it's a question for you, Tatiana. What should physicians do to warn against the dangerous games, some of which need to be banned? And of course, aggression is a side effect, but the way we coped with other negative social effects, I'm sure we will cope with it too. Good, thank you. One more question? I have this wonderful question. Now, Steve Jobs is such a good guy. He has invented the iPad, and why didn't he give it to his own kids to play? Well, we know lots of examples when professional experience is not transferred into the sphere of family relations, when brilliant teachers were unable to educate their own kids, and certain mathematicians of genius were unable to handle simple everyday problems. So I think that Steve Jobs did not mix his profession up with family issues. He was no cognitologist or psychologist. His task was to sell his Apple products, and he coped with it brilliantly, but he didn't want to make his kids buyers of his products. May I ask you a question also about Steve Jobs and Apple? I asked my kids about what questions they would like to ask you, and one of the questions was about morality. Are there any differences between how Siri, Google, and other digital helpers should handle the questions asked by adults and kids, and probably an answer given to a kid should be different from the answer given to an adult. That's a brilliant question. Our kids are born in the digital world, and they think on a different level. We here are interested tourists, and the still older generation have been forcibly deported into that digital environment. Look what questions digital aboriginals ask. That's an idea for a startup and an innovation. Bravo. Now we have just 10 minutes left. We can either let our support groups ask their questions, or you can make your final statements. Of course, there's something I want to emphasize badly. The most horrible thing that happens is solitude online. We are losing our family. The more gadgets and devices one has, the more lonely people are in their family. I have seen a real-life gathering at a restaurant celebrating someone's birthday. They congratulated the birthday man, gave their gifts, but then took their gadgets in their hands and dispelled. That's the most horrible thing that can happen. I am all for progress. I am in favor of artificial intelligence. I want us to be happy and rich, but I don't want us to turn into bio-waste. That's the greatest threat that exists. And we must not lose our souls, our human place, and we don't want to live through those horrible stories horror movies where people have the same digits on their hands and lose their body, their beauty, and their souls. That's what I want to emphasize. Okay, how do we teach kids to not be lonely? Well, there are certain obvious things. Whatever we want to form in our kids, we must have in ourselves. When we say that we have 3 types of communication, we understand that oral speech is only developed through imitation. Unless parents talk to their kids and don't read with them, if the kids won't be able to do that. If you want your kids to speak nicely, speak to them and use Skype to talk to your kids. If you want your kids to read and write, hold a book together with them in your hands. Take them to the theater, discuss what you have read, and even if it's an e-book, it doesn't matter. There are wonderful apps and digital formats such as made by Samsung, like, Living Pages, a new reading environment. And finally, if you want your kids to be adequate citizens of tomorrow and the movers of a digital economy, teach them the basics of digital communication. Well, you have asked the second question my kids asked me to give you, and now I can see raised hands. Now, questions from the audience. I'm Ivan. It doesn't matter where I work. I'm unmarried. I have no kids, but I'm an elder brother, and my brother is 18 years my junior. I got a phone when I was 16. My parents got their phones when they were 30, and they can handle it well. Now, it's allowed to drive a car when you are 18, but no one says that there are more cars. Let's let kids drive at an earlier age. Why do we need to plunge children into this digital environment from a very early age? Yes, great. When you talk about the developing brain, there are many threats here. So the first thing we need to do is for this developing mind, we need to humanize it, to give it a feeling of warmth and beauty, and only then will it handle digital info. Now a question from this side. But may I also take this question? I think we will lose opportunities to use the brain potential of modern kids. Psychology has established that what a child can do at the age of 3, they will lose later. And they demonstrate the symbolic function of their conscience already when they're 1 year old. And unless we use this opportunity, we will never optimize the brain's potential. And it can only be done through very early age, but of course in a very rational way. But the same thing can be done in a different way. I'm Pavel, and many thanks for a very intensive discussion. May I ask a question as a man who has to do with adoptive children? One of the greatest traumas is the absence of a mother's love, the absence of bodily contact when your mother holds you in her hands and kisses you and sings lullabies to you. Some kids may not develop well, some may not even overcome this trauma. Now, as digital communications grow, are we going to see more of such traumas? I believe that digital communication I cannot say it replaces bodily contact, but we cannot fight the development of civilization. But, a smiley face is a substitute of, stroking. It's an expression of emotion, and it's a compensation of what we miss in the virtual environment. This is, of course, a problem, but we cannot fight it no matter what debates we take part in, and we can find good replacements. You know how early prematurely born children are rehabilitated. The main thing is when the mother holds the baby in her hands and holds the baby dear to her heart. No smiley faces can replace the human soul and the bodily warmth of a baby's mother. No one is going to throw the internet away, but I first call on taking and placing the soul first and human warmth first, the love in the first place. Now, one more question from this side, and we'll run out of time. I am Ina, and my question is for you. Margarita, as a teacher, I have no kids yet, but my colleagues all have children, and they keep telling me about the modern education system, that it's undergoing constant change, that it's a lot worse, that nothing is explained to the children, and when, for example, a kid has studied English for 2 years, but they have not yet begun to study the alphabet. I was really shocked by that. I believe that My knowledge was the best because it was given by an old school. They knew nothing about those modern communications. The best knowledge was fostered in me by 70-plus year-old teachers. Okay, we understand your question. You are, in fact, asking us to assess the old system against the new system. We know that education is part of culture, and the task of culture is the selection and transfer of values accepted from the old times. So education pursues the task of preserving this heritage. But the speed of change taking place today prevents us from updating knowledge fast in the old formats. So I am in favor of putting conservative content into innovative formats like online and electronic teaching. And apart from Darwin, I'm sure that Jan Amos Komenski would be an innovator today, and he would probably invent new principles of online learning that would assure the preservation of classical values, but in a new modern format. But because no matter what we say, modern kids perceive information differently. They don't perceive the classical text of textbooks. They are they're perceptive to different kinds of texts. Thank you. I have to stop your debate now with great regret because it was very stormy and interesting, and the key dilemma of digitalization versus humanization. I don't think you stuck to the opposite views, but you looked at it from different sides. I would like to thank Margarita for being with her today, and on behalf of the medical community, I should probably give her my gadget as a gift, but I won't do that.
Well, now the last ones, well, it's going to be harder. We have our last part of the discussion. We have two people that you also saw here, Dominic Fash and Dmitry Timofeyev. And once again, because everything was mentioned, I'm going to mention just two important moments. We're going to discuss a competition, cooperation, also the state approach, private approach to business. And here we have this division. Dmitry is a representative of the state. As a member of the committee of the State Duma Energy Committee, and also advisor of the governor of Zabaikalia, and Dominic Fash is an entrepreneur, creator of many companies and shareholder of many companies, is the representatives of private business. As it was mentioned before our session originally, when we called it cooperation against competition. And that's quite right, because in the beginning of our conversation, we could see that Olaf said, why should we argue? Let's cooperate. Let's move forward. Let's get our common result. We saw that in the first discussion, in the second discussion, when there was not a struggle, but actually joint cooperation. So now I would like to give you the floor, Dominique. we'll start with you. Thank you.
XIX век, где было запрещено за русским столом говорить по-русски, и все дворяне говорили по-французски, даже Александр Сергеевич писал Наталье, хоть с ошибками, но переписка по-французски. Это время прошло, к сожалению, поэтому я буду по-русски говорить.
That time, unfortunately, is over, and I'm going to speak Russian, and then I would like to comment in brief, and then regarding artificial intelligence, it seems to me that the solution here regarding a freedom of human being, well, I think that Dostoevsky found the solution, and I suggest that you read again the notes from the underground when the protagonist says 2 by 2 equals 4, but 2 by 2 equals 5 is not that bad. And then regarding Steve Jobs, I'm going to speak more about him in the next session. And I suggest that you watch a famous Stanford speech by Steve Jobs. And he discusses these issues, and he's so convincing. I just want to show his speech. And the third thing that I wanted to mention, well, this modernization that is going on today. There is some kind of a paradox. On the one hand, it's we have these tiny objects. There is more information in my smartphone than the president of the U.S. had 20 years ago. So here in these tiny objects, we have lots of opportunities. But at the same time, it's globalization going on. And tomorrow I can attend a lecture, physics lecture in Tokyo, or mathematicians in Boston. But there is but. We live in the world where, as Paul Valéry said, that images substitute thoughts, communications get substituted, and communications substitute good thoughts and good ideas. This is one of the dangers of our world. And now I get to our subject. I've been involved with innovations all my life in France and then in Russia. And everybody knows my position regarding renovation and innovation. And I don't think that the government shouldn't be involved in innovation. It's catastrophe, because the government should do what it should do. It should create stable protection of all the citizens, create good system of education, create system of development of funding science. We can discuss that a lot in Russia. Also to create normal tax system. But innovations actually have to be undertaken by entrepreneurs and small and medium, because elephants cannot tango. Okay. I will start with most of my life I worked in government agencies or in state-owned companies. And my position is that the government is needed in the innovation process. In order to confirm it, I would like to say that in the UN, the member states, out of 180 member states, majority. And first day we heard about this Pareto rule 20 to 80, and mostly those are the countries that are catching up with other countries. those innovations, they're not created in most of those countries. Sometimes, but usually they are just trying to catching up with the innovations that emerged in different countries. And when we're talking about modernization, which is catching up, the role of the government is extremely important, because the countries that have to catch up, they must get determined. This is the direction of our movement, and they have to concentrate their resources there. They shouldn't waste time and reinvent the bicycle. And the government here is highly important. Its function is important. And secondly, what I wanted to mention, you work for 5 days, and the agenda is such that every 5 days lead you towards some global result. Imagine that yesterday it was nice outside. Today it's windy, it's raining, and yesterday it was good weather. And just answer the question, if the organizers give the opportunity. Well, I would like to go for a walk for a couple of hours, and then I would have some lunch, come back, work a little bit. Many people had that. And then imagine how it could affect the result that you must get in 3 or 4 days, so in the course of 5 days. Here is the market, and you have the opportunity to compete, to make your decision, go right, go left, and deal with venture investment. Are you going to get the real result without a centralized organization? And could you be proud of yourself in several days? How proud would you be? Or maybe it's 2 or 3 hours that you walked outside yesterday when weather is good. Okay, it's practically about the leading role of the Communist Party. Okay, Dominic. I didn't say that there is no need for the government. The government is needed, but it must be doing its own part. I will show you a couple of examples. First of all, the government, the state, also major energy companies, and that's why they're not innovative companies. They are based on the vertical system. I don't have to explain in Russia what the vertical system is all about. And the system of innovations is horizontal. That's why there is this significant paradox, significant contradiction between innovation and vertical system. That's example number one. I believe that everybody understands it, and we can give the anecdotal evidence regarding it. And secondly, and Steve Jobs is talking about it, and even your president repeated it yesterday. He added something, but he just said, well, but Steve Jobs says, be foolish and be hungry. Here is certain contradiction, because the state is protecting the society. In order to be innovative, you have to get out of the rut. You have to get out. You have to lose some of that good taste, because major thinkers, they think out of the box for sure. They try to use another way. And here it's a disruption. Disruption with the existing order. The government is protecting the existing order. The innovation wants to create something new. Well, I would like to ask a very simple question. Well, there is a young man, Sergey Brin. He's not that young anymore, and he's one of the founders of Google. And you know that he's Russian. But he didn't create Google in Russia. My question is how to do it such a way in Russia so that the next Brin stays in Russia, doesn't leave Russia. Well, first, I agree that actually the government and Russian society must thrive so that Sergey Brin and people like Zworykin, long before Sergey Brin, stayed in Russia. That's for sure. But here, this is quite a complicated issue, because when we say that Sergey Brin created Google in the US, we bypass our first stage discussion. Is it cooperation or is it competition? Because when there is Russia and the US, they compete. They are against each other, and they divide human capital, and they take the best people from each other. There is no cooperation. And that's why talking about the fact that we want Brin to stay here, for what? So that we could be as advanced as the US. We can keep him here. We'll take your passports and we'll keep you all here, and you're not going to leave the country. That's the worst possible answer, but this is solution. Or we are going to create such conditions that you don't want to leave the country. And of course, the government must try to create the conditions so that you don't want to leave, that's for sure. But I would like to emphasize, when we're talking about the position of the government, very often one person, citizen of this country, remembers about the government imposing rules. And we keep forgetting that the state is a consensus. 1917, you know, the experience of our predecessors when they didn't want to stay in that country ceased to exist. And 50% of what you keep silent about is that you agreed maybe next Sergey Brin would be forced to stay in Russia. In this case, ask Dominic regarding this state. Dominic, I'd like to, just repeating my original idea. You know, when we have to catch up with technological leaders who conducted innovation already, can we afford spending the resources that they already spent inventing that bicycle? Maybe we should concentrate on so that all citizens could have gadgets. Simple situation. So Steve invented Apple. We don't purchase Apple in Russia. We take Russian Yota and spend time and resources and make Yota go all the way to Apple-type device. But if we take Apple, we take Internet, those standards are not ours, but we want everyone to have communications. Either we catch up, well, this is the official decision. Why should we reinvent the bicycle when you say that there is constant competition? In this case, every country is going to reinvent this bicycle again and again, trying to make it better than Apple bicycle. And the competition must be limited in this case if it's already been invented. Well, the first approach is like Lavrentiy Beria, and that's an obsolete approach, although it was extremely efficient. Well, and the atom bomb, it was created. I'm not going to comment on it. Everybody understands what I'm talking about. But secondly, the answer is here in this room. This is the role and the level of consciousness of young people, new generation, which is going to make Russia in the next 50, 40 years, is going to create everything in Russia in the course of 40, 50 years. And there are my friends here. Well, I live in Nice, 3 planes a day. Non-French people come to France. Children of some people go to study in France. And I believe they're voting with their feet. And I believe that it's a dangerous thing for Russia that must be dealt with. There is the format. Quite interesting format, and I would like to draw attention to 2 formats. Number one, this is a major project, ITER. People working in Rosatom know about it. It's in France. This is cooperation of France, Europe, the US, China, Russia, which is building thermonuclear energy sites. Well, it's interesting. I am for this format. I doubt commercial outcome. There could be interesting approaches and bad results, which is dangerous. Second format that I believe in, and I want to open this window of opportunity here, and getting to another format of approach, large systems like the Academy of Sciences, even NSA in the US. I believe that they survived, and Silicon Valley new approaches show us the new ways. Who is creating new products, new innovations? Those are small and medium companies. Big companies, they destroy jobs. And I believe that we must invent new formats. Companies, enterprises that would be involved in research. Jobs are changing. The structure of jobs is changing.
I used to be at the head of NLG5. I had a turbine with 330 workers, but as soon as the turbine was replaced, the number of jobs went down to 20, and digitalization eliminates jobs. So there's something else that should be put in place. I believe Dmitry asked you about a different thing. He said that the state can perform a regulatory role. Should we regulate the process, or will it go on by itself? Okay, I've taken the question format, and this is becoming an international format. And in France, I have companies that are working with Russia despite the sanctions. So they are flexible, but the big elephants cannot tango. Good. All right. We are absolutely out of time, and we are being asked by the organizers to finish. But could you give a brief answer to one well-known question? The flight to Mars. Do you believe what will help better and put people from Earth to Mars, government support or private initiative? Of course, it's a state decision. Rather than build one aircraft carrier, you can perform the Mars mission. I will tell you a joke. The political bureau decides we need to fly to the sun. They tell them it may be dangerous. The sun is hot. Okay, the Politburo replies, well, then let's fly at night. Okay, let's expect the governments to take a weighed approach. We have to finish, and I would like to thank the last pair of speakers. Many thanks to the speakers and our wonderful moderator. And on a very pleasant note, I would like to ask all the speakers to mount the platform right now. And let me tell you that our portal of the Russia2017.org portal has started voting on the 3 pairs. Please choose the winner. And this can be done until lunchtime, so don't rush. And we are now ready to give gifts on behalf of Mako, our educational program. Small